Right, okay. Evening all. And if you've been with us during the day, welcome back and well done for hanging on so long. So here we are in our final session for today. And I want to introduce Dr. Samantha McElligott, who is going to be talking about leadership and decision making. Samantha's been working with us for about 5 years now. She is a freelance consultant in leadership, and she sort of straddles that perfect sort of gap, or that bridge, I should say, between academia. She has a PhD in transformational leadership and its application to the outdoors, but also in our world, because she has mountain training qualifications herself, and still works like we do in the outdoors, working with adults and young people, both on expeditions abroad and also on courses in the UK. So although she's not a mountain training provider, she knows our world pretty well. And we've been working together, as I say, for about the last 5 years, developing leadership and decision-making models, coming up with draft competencies, which we'll talk about later in a minute, which may well get introduced into the walking schemes with the walking schemes review. And that's one of the key things we want to run past you to get your feedback about that. And she's also been delivering workshops on leadership and decision making, and also on coaching skills. And by that I mean candidate management type coaching skills for the last few years too. So I hope that you get everything you need from her. She's an expert in her field, and I'm going to hand over to you now, Samantha.
Hi, thanks, Guy. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I hope you're not. I hope you're at that nice stage where you've got a suitable amount of caffeine, but not feeling too headachy or wired. So for anyone who does know me, you know I like to talk a lot. So I've deliberately made sure that this session includes lots of breakouts and your discussions and your questions and things. And as Guy says, the main thing we want to look at tonight, because you will have seen a lot of the things that I'm going to show you many times before, because we've been introducing the leadership stuff for a number of years now. But the main thing we want to look at is I guess a proffering of competencies that you can measure up your candidates against in terms of how well they're doing in the leadership stakes. And we're going to talk about what they look like, how they're worded, and most importantly, how you apply them. So just before we start that, here's the general housekeeping. Let me see where we are. Okay, so you've probably seen this before. We are recording the session. Hopefully you've got names and things, and you're not just like, oh, I don't know, Smokey the Parrot. And just if you have got something you want to ask or anything you want to say, feel free to drop something in the chat. I've got that on my screen. Equally, raise your hand, and Kath and Guy are here with us, with me as well, so they can kind of pick up anything that I miss. And Guy is our expert provider kind of manager in the room, because I am not a provider, so there are lots of things that you will want to know that perhaps I'm not so keen at. And while I do like to talk, I don't like to blag, so we'll make sure that whatever we're talking about is the right thing. Okay, so yeah, there we are, that's me. Obviously not me in the picture, but so what I want to look at then is, what is it that we are trying to offer you? Well, as well as some CPD, we're trying to look at a way of making your job easier when you are training and assessing candidates, in terms of how do you get over this difficult obstacle of knowing whether or not their leadership skills, their leadership behaviors, their leadership competency measures up to being able to award them the certificate that they're after. And in the past, it hasn't necessarily been that tangible, and it's far easier to measure somebody against a technical competency, because they can either navigate or they can't. They can either tie a knot or they can't. And on those things, there's a scale of how well they do that. They're very easy, observable skills for you to measure. And leadership is a little less tangible. So we're going to look at a really good way of making sure that you can ascribe to a measurement and say, right, I know for certain what it is I'm looking for and how I'm going to measure that. So that's kind of the outcome. We are looking for feedback on this. So definitely during the session, we can have a good discussion about it, but afterwards as well, if you've got any thoughts, please do email across and we'll work out where and who those emails are going to go to. I don't mind if it's to me or to NTA, but Guy can have a think about where he wants those to go and let us know at the end. And then we're going to look at why we've chosen these particular competencies. Now, writing these competencies has taken probably about 1.5 years after embedding sort of models for the previous sort of 2.5, 3 years before that. And it's all based on science and evidence. So it is really well grounded, but we'll just go over that again so you're absolutely sure that what we're giving you is well thought out. And then we're going to look at how does it work in practice? And we want you to troubleshoot that, thinking of your experiences with candidates, what has worked in the past, times that you've kind of had a few tricky moments, things that haven't gone so well, and how we can get around that and how the competencies might help us. And then hopefully we'll have some time to talk about the decision making sort of in specifics, although it will be mentioned amongst the competencies. So looking at things like leadership style and the influences on how decisions are made. And we can look at everything tonight at 2 levels. So for your own personal practice, so taking your provider hat off and just looking at your own personal practice, how do I rate as a leader? Where can I improve? How do I make decisions? What am I aware of when I'm doing that? What could I become more aware of? And then putting your provider hat back on, looking at how you decide somebody else's capacity for leadership and their ability to make decisions. So a double sort of level approach, hopefully. And by that point, it's probably time for bed then. So yeah, we'll finish whenever you're ready. And yeah, we might have a little sort of 5-minute break in between so people can go and lie down in a corner. As you can see, I'm in a very sort of relaxing room. It's bright red and there's armory on the walls, not my chosen office, but I thought that if I had a really scary room, that would allow you all to feel much more comfortable. Anyway, to start with, I have some questions for you to think about. So what we're going to do in a minute is we're going to go into little breakout rooms. And see, I promised I wouldn't talk too much. And thinking about that dual level thing, I want you to think about this from your provider's point of view. So in what situations do you find that making decisions about your candidate, so are they reaching the mark? Are they pass or defer? What else might they need to do? So thinking about your role as a trainer or an assessor, when is it more difficult for you to make decisions about the group that you're looking at? What are the particular circumstances that arise where you think, oh God, not this again, or oh, this is going to be a really tricky one? And what might help you in those situations? How might that decision making become simpler for you? So what I'd really like for you to do is in the little breakout groups, have a discussion about those 2 questions. So feel free to sort of take a screenshot or write them down, because I'm not entirely sure how the breakout thing works, whether you can still see this screen here, but if not, yeah, just think about those 2 questions. And it might help you to think about perhaps some example scenarios that you've come across that might really help you exemplify, this is a difficult decision that I had to make about something. What do you all think? And that kind of thing. And then when we come back into the group, maybe you could nominate a spokesperson and we can have lots of discussion about this, but when you are feeding back, if you could just kind of keep it quite brief so that we can get the meat of what you've discussed. And then when all the groups have told us their feedback, we can then open it up to a bigger discussion. So hopefully that's agreeable. Okay, so Kath, do I need to hand over to you? What happens? Do they all magically disappear? Look at that. Go join your breakout rooms. Excellent. Okay, thanks everyone. So yeah, one person came back to ask for a clarification, and simply was just trying to get a snapshot of what makes your life as an assessor or even on training when you're thinking about action points for your candidates, what makes it quite difficult in terms of having to make decisions about them, so pass, defer, or areas of weakness. So room number 1, do they know the room numbers, Kath? They were in. Okay, so room number 1, have we got anyone who'd like to tell us, give us a little synopsis of what you were talking about and any kind of ideas you want to share, please?
So that was Cliff, Paul and Peter.
Peter squared, excellent.
Okay, it's Paul. I'll go for quickly synopsis for breakout 1. The first question, I think we're all in consensus, is that it was if you are presented with a relatively benign environment and a strong team, sometimes it's really difficult for those situations that arise that require a different approach to leadership, if we're speaking specifically about that. So without having to kind of generate an artificial scenario, that can be quite difficult. And in number 2, what would help in these situations, we decided that a kind of a competency framework, which maybe isn't, too binary, and there's a little bit of room for interpretation, but something a little bit more than a checklist. And I guess incumbent upon everybody is your own knowledge. The more knowledgeable you are, the more you are going to be able to bring to that assessment.
Paul Taylor, top of the class as always. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's really nice to know. Thank you. Quite interesting then. So, and I've been asked this question a lot actually. So I do a lot with the Joint Services Mountain Training Centres, and quite a lot of the concern that they had was, how do you test people when the environment itself doesn't test them? How do you really see what they're capable of, and how their leadership style, their developmental stuff would be tested? So yeah, good point. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll leave that one on the table for a sec. So room number 2, Kath, who did we have in there?
So that's the room with Andy Newton, Chris Halliwell, that group there.
Okay, room number 3. Who have we got in room number 3?
So, Andy, Gwilym, James, Katie, Matt and Richard.
Yeah, it's Andy here.
Great, thanks, Andy.
Yeah, well, I suppose we talked about an assessment type situation with mountain leader, perhaps where a candidate thought they were better than they actually are or were during the assessment, and strategies to get around that one. And then we talked about perhaps different levels there. You got the middle ground where somebody's okay, and then somebody was appalling. But if somebody just thought they were better, how do you broach that one? And we just talked just around that one really. We didn't come to the final part of the question, but it was there's some interesting stuff there. Proper old school stuff, having tick lists, while you're assessing, and making keeping your comments there, and so on. But yeah, that kept us talking for a while. What you do. I'm just trying to read some of my poor handwriting here now, so yeah, I'll apologize now. And I think it was Katie was saying that just asking, maybe getting the one strategy is to ask the candidate what went well, and so try to draw it out to them. So if they actually highlight that one for you, it just makes life a little bit easier. But if they just think they're better than they were, obviously nothing went poorly, did it? So yeah, it could be a difficult situation to try and get out of.
Oh yeah, absolutely. A bit of a nightmare really. And I guess that sort of, it opens up a bigger question about how individuals manage expectations. So when do you start feedback? Is it something that you have ongoing all the way through? Because you certainly don't want to end up in that nightmare situation right at the end of the course and be like, so how do you think it went then? Oh yeah, brilliant. You're like,
But whether that if that's an assessment situation, you just wonder if things need to be more honest and truthful during a training course. How they got through a training course. Either and being allowed to think that they're the best and so on. It does become difficult. But if they're told the truth, perhaps, then they got weaknesses that they need to work on. Again, it's whether they're listening or not, or just oblivious and to listening. Maybe they should go into government, really, shouldn't they? If they're listening.
Good one. Yes. Yeah. And that's right. That's a really good point, isn't it, Andy? And I think as with all things in life, we can't help everybody. And I think there will always be, I don't know what the statistic would be, but there will always be a percentage, maybe it's 1 per group or 1 every 20 groups, where it just doesn't matter how it's presented, doesn't matter how brilliantly you facilitated the training or the assessment, it's just not going to work for them. They're just going to come up with something contrary or kick off or something like that. But I think what you're describing there is getting them to take accountability. And that's a really powerful tool, isn't it? Just sort of, there's a fine line between, especially when we're talking about something like leadership, because a technical skill is something that's outside of the person. Yes, they kind of maybe feel a little bit of ownership about, well, I thought I was good at that skill, but actually it's not something that's an internal process, their behaviors, their character. And sometimes when we present people with, like, I don't think your leadership was particularly good, that can feel quite shaming for somebody because it feels like a very personal attack. Whereas if you're able on a list and during a training session come up with an action plan of specific points where overall this is what the leadership picture looks like, this skill was good, this skill, this behavior, these are areas we need to work on. That's much more about having accountability rather than making it too personal. But you're right, and it needs to be honest right from the beginning. So yeah, I think this goes back to what Paul was saying, having a sort of a framework, something that allows us to be able to say, look here, see this number 3, this is the bit I'm talking about. I can measure you against this. Okay, perfect, thank you. Room number 4, have we got anyone who wants to tell us anything from there?
Okay, so this is Anthea, Kath, Callum, Chris, Jake and Terry.
Hello, I've been volunteered to do this. Right.
Well done,
okay.
Chris.
We thought, well, I thought in the first place, decision making is often difficult when the candidates, so in assessment, when the candidates are borderline. So they're not woeful, that's quite easy. They're not really good, that's also fairly easy. But they're doing some dodgy stuff. They're a little bit unsafe occasionally, but nothing, you know, is it enough to fail them? This, that, and the other. So they're very much just on the cusp. So what would help in these situations? There are several threads to this. So maybe giving lots of feedback throughout the process, so that they're aware that they're borderline, and maybe they can up their game. Potentially changing how you are assessing them. So if scenarios aren't working, maybe do it subtly differently. So instead of saying, I want you to lead this group to this point, you say, I want you to lead this group, but whilst you're doing it, I want you to tell them about walking on bearings, or, you know, teach something. So they something like that. We also thought that, well, I thought having, like the previous person saying, having a list of things to judge by would make things easier, but I was alone in that. And we also thought that if they had real groups, sometimes that would make it easier. So how you could manage that, we don't know, but if the potential for a real group was there. And the other thing, we thought that sometimes discussing it with other assessors sometimes helped. So I remember taking photos of somebody's belay and then sending it to a mate and going, look, he did this, it's safe, but why did he do that? What do you think? And this, that, and the other. So that helped. And I think that was everything.
Beautiful synopsis, Chris. Thank you very much. Lots of really good points there. I really like your thing at the end. It sort of prompted me to think more about how isolated you can feel as a leader, because essentially when you're the trainer or the assessor, you are in the leadership responsibility position. And that is quite a responsibility that you have there, because this is about making a grade, not just for a certification, but for something that they now are going to go forward and have responsibility for other people. And that's, a huge safety implication. So I don't underestimate at all the job that you guys have to do. And I think having that forum for being able to discuss things with other people is really, really important. And to feel that you know, you're all very good at what you do. We know that from all of the research that went on, from all the feedback we get from clients, but sometimes you can suffer a little bit from self-doubt, or a little bit of, I just want a second opinion here. And I think it's great that you can have an opportunity to do that. So yeah, any way that you can find outlets to get that second opinion, to get that sort of feedback, that sort of, you know, you come back at the end of a day of work and you sit in the staff room and have a cup of tea and chat about things. Well, you don't necessarily get that if you're a lone person on the hill. So yeah, that's a really good point. And the borderline, yeah, that's the really tough one, isn't it? Because it could be that they're, you know, suffering from sort of the white coat syndrome. You know, they're just so choked on pressure for the week, and actually they just make lots of mistakes. Or it could be that they're just very untidy the whole way through. And so maybe that goes back to Andy's point about there has to be some, you know, greater clarity at the training stage about where their action points are, and where their weaknesses are, and indeed where their strengths are. But then I really love your points, Chris, about having that constant discussion all the way through the course. Just, this is where we're at today. Okay, what did you think went well here? Where can you improve? Okay, this is what I've observed. And I definitely need to see sharper belay technique. I definitely need to see absolute concrete this. I need to see that. So just having that checking point all the way through. Yeah. Nice. I like that. Lots of things to think about there. Okay, so room number 5, I think we're on. Thank you, Chris and team.
Okay, so Andy, Phil, Rod, Stuart and Sue.
Hi, this is Sue, but I thought Stuart was going to be doing it because he was taking down all the notes and was going to summarise it, but I'm not sure. So yeah, it was a bit like what we've just been discussing, really. Comment was made about different people's styles and the way they approach it with the leadership. So that was one of the things. So we sort of saying, just because they have a way about them, we wouldn't want to make it personal, or that's not the kind of style you should be doing, or whatever. We talked about that for a little while. We did, mention about that point about if you can come back and competencies or something you can actually refer back to as something a bit more concrete. And in no way make anything like a personal thing, but you prefer one style or something like that. I don't know. Was there anything else, group?
Yeah, sorry, Susan, I was on mute there. So I was waffling away to myself quite happily. So yeah, I think we kind of talked about the not making it personal, obviously trying to keep it objective rather than subjective. Appreciation for different sort of leadership styles, communication styles, but also not shying away from kind of making them aware of what their style is, and kind of maybe drawbacks of always being in that style, making sure they're aware of other styles, that kind of situational leadership aspects. We also kind of chatted about clearly communicating the competency you want to see them demonstrate. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everybody else has kind of summed it up. Susan also mentioned specifically on the Lowland Leader Awards, with the guys coming in on those courses, it's the first leadership award, potentially it might be their very first attempt at even having done any leadership, so confidence could be a big kind of key there.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Sue and Stuart. That's great. I think that's it's really interesting, isn't it, that people take these things so personally when you're talking about communication or style or behavior, because it does feel very personal, doesn't it? And I think especially if Stuart was talking about situational leadership there, so I'll give you your 5 later. We're going to talk about that a little bit towards the end. But yes, it's very easy to adopt a particular style and to be comfortable in that style, whether it's you're the person who's kind of the joker, you're at the front, you're the chatty one, you're the quiet, sort of bit more Yoda-like in the background. It's very easy to always adopt the same style. Perhaps you're more directive, perhaps you're a bit more coachy. And no style is appropriate to all situations. So it's getting people to understand that there are benefits to everything they're doing, but it's about recognizing when they need to change, in the same way that a particular, I don't know, particular knot or a particular set of anchors, there's nothing wrong with them, but they may not be appropriate in all situations. So it's just getting people to recognize that we're depersonalizing something that feels very personal into the fact that it's just a recognition of what's available in your toolbox. So I've just had a, while you were talking as well, I've just had a little message from Cliff down here. I do like this, Cliff, and we might have to get Guy to talk about this quickly as well. So Cliff has said, is Samantha daring to consider a complete change in the culture that some assessing mountain training providers use? Actually receiving feedback as the course goes on is a novel idea. It's actually the way I assess, but not sure it's the way many providers, perhaps national centres, use. And as Stuart's put in, I'm not sure I'd agree that specific MT culture, in my experience from working with a good few different providers over the last 5 years. Yeah, obviously tricky at times. Yes, of course, in the moment. So just, I don't know, we can't really do a show of hands. It's such a shame, isn't it? But any particular strong thoughts about, maybe do we call it feedback, or do we call it where I'm noticing the gaps and need to be sorted out? What do people think?
I was going to say, call it continual assessment.
Okay, so Paul, tell us about how you kind of approach that then. What are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, similar to Cliff, who was in group one when we were chatting before, is that it's that kind of, if I use an army phrase that they use a lot now, it's the train in, not select out.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of educate piece, is drawing out from the candidates rather than it just being an explicit list that they've got to meet, because they might meet that in various different ways depending on who they are and their experience and kind of like situational approach to leadership. So I would see that happening in two ways, being at the end of each phase, as it were, you know, whether they've done a navigational leg or they've set up a campsite or whatever task that they've been given, they should be clear as to what they did well and to where they could improve, aligned against the competency framework that we spoke about before. So it's not something that we as assessors are pulling out of thin air. It's something that's already been agreed upon, and that and there's a reason why it's done in that way, and there's a reason why it's important. And then maybe at the end of each day, there's an opportunity for a more general, let's think about where you think you might improve on your performance today. And yeah, you're right, I agree with you, we could probably do that better. And let's have a discussion about what that might look like and how can I help you make that better when you do it tomorrow.
Yeah, nice. Okay, thank you, Paul. And a couple of people, Andy and Terry, have written sort of similar things, that sort of ongoing thing. And actually, Andy's raised my favourite thing in the world, talking about praise. It is important, you're right, Andy, and it does build confidence. Obviously, if it's genuine and sort of meaningful praise, like you did this well, rather than just good job, because nobody really knows what that means. But yes, I mean, like I say, I'm not a provider, so I don't want to kind of really overemphasize my thing about it's really important to keep giving feedback, because obviously you have a job to do, and for some people giving continuous feedback feels a little bit like perhaps giving them too much opportunity to fail and fail and fail. But I don't know, maybe that's a sort of moot point. So Gwilliam's just written down, giving formative feedback is definitely a skill that I see used badly. It shouldn't influence the outcome of the task, but can be used well throughout the assessment in between tests. And that's the key point, isn't it? Well done, Gwilliam. I like that. It's really kind of what I was waffling around. Shouldn't influence the outcome of the task. It's just you're giving them the opportunity as an assessor, or indeed on the training course, you're giving them the opportunity to show you what they can do. You're giving them every opportunity to pass, but not necessarily lowering any bar for that to happen. And yeah, feedback is great, because I would imagine it would be quite a sort of awkward thing to get to the end of a week and say, well, if you'd only done this, and perhaps it would have been very simple for them to show you that if they appreciated that's what was required. So a tricky one, I think. But yeah, great point to raise. So we have gone a little tangent here, but that's fine. It's a nice discussion. This is what we would be doing were we all in a classroom, but there would be biscuits as well. So that's cool. So we'll pick this up again perhaps when we talk about situational leadership. But have we still got another group? Kath, are we on group 6?
We talked about the people being, someone else said it a minute ago about people being borderline, so it's not black and white, and the difficulties of that and the emotion behind it. People put a lot of they put everything into these assessments, and you know, their jobs on the line or their plans for the future, and you know, everything's to them, it's at that moment in time, it's absolutely everything. So that can be very difficult when there's a lot of emotion involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great point. Thank you, Christine. Yeah, really, really good point, isn't it? And this is, it's a very emotive point. And some of the assessments, you know, are a week long or 5 or 6 days long. That's a long time for somebody to be on their kind of high stress A game. So they do become emotional anyway. You know, there's fatigue thrown in, there's sort of environmental factors as well. But yes, you're right. So for some people, this is the most meaningful thing that they're doing at that time. You know, I did my Mountain Leader Award 20 years ago. I know you can't tell. 20 years ago, and I still remember exactly what I was doing, where we were, where we went, what I did wrong, quite a lot. Yeah, so it is a very emotive thing, isn't it? So it's how we manage to manage that process so that we can de-escalate that personalization of it. So what's Richard said here, feedback when they're doing okay is useful. Yeah, in your humble opinion, I like that. Yes, yeah, absolutely. A bit of confidence building is always good, especially if they are feeling a little bit emotional. We're all humans at the end of the day, and it's quite nice to know that we might be being assessed, but we're not being, you know, character assassinated, I guess. Not that you guys do that. Okay, so that's really useful for me to see where we're at. So there are a lot of situations then when your decision making as an assessor is really quite tricky, and we have a more human element to it, we have competency elements, we have environmental and situational elements to it as well, and also that big thing about our own personal style, like how do you integrate feedback, praise, tick list, that kind of thing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you, and see if I can get off this screen, show you my very neat desktop there. I'm going to show you this. So let's see if I can move this out of the way. Okay, so this is, we've spoken a lot about having some structure, having some competencies. So the walking awards are going through review, and the idea was to augment, not change, but augment the leadership element, to give you more structure to help with your feedback and your assessing. So this doesn't address everything that we've just spoken about, but hopefully this will lead into opening up some more of those conversations and removing some of those difficulties for you. So I'm going to read it out, even though it's on the screen, and I'm going to leave Guy with a nugget to think about whether this is something that you can review, whether it can be sent out in a PDF or whatever. Anyway, so this has come from over the past 5 years, integrating the transformational leadership model, which is bound by evidence. It's the one that's used within the military. That's where it came from originally. And it's basically tested to prove that when leaders demonstrate the 7 particular behaviors, which we'll look at shortly, and I'm sure it's something you're very familiar with, having, you know, kind of escaped it in the last 5 years. But when they demonstrate the 7 behaviors, it gets more from their followers. So these are eliciting higher performance outcomes. So we want to encourage the leaders of tomorrow, the mountain leaders, the climbing leaders of tomorrow, to demonstrate more of these behaviors, whilst also recognizing that there is a situational element to the way that they lead. So there is a nod to style. So how and when it is appropriate to lead in a certain way, and what you actually do as a leader in that situation. So safety always paramount. But going back to that earlier scenario, I think it might have been Andy who said it, in a benign environment, when you don't particularly have to worry all the time, you know, it's not the first thing in your mind about the safety element because it's all taken care of. What are you doing then? Okay, so it's giving the candidates an opportunity to demonstrate what they would be doing in different situations and showing some consistency for the way that they behave, insofar as they are behaving in a way that is going to get more from their followers. They're going to inspire and develop the people that they are leading, not just tugging them on the end of a rope and go, come on, this is how we go out in the mountains. Okay, so note the draft written all over this. So draft leadership competencies. So this is what we are putting to you as loose term criteria for you to measure against. So the assessment criteria have been written to be simple, specific, measurable, and clear to the end user, i.e. you. The competencies all describe observable behaviors, i.e. you can watch and see if it's happening. You don't have to be like, what are they thinking? Because those are the invisible internal processes. We can't possibly guess somebody's philosophy and motivation if they are not expressing it. The behaviors should be demonstrated with authenticity and consistency, because nobody likes a kiss ass who's pretending to do these things when really they don't give a monkeys about the rest of their group. And that's fairly easy to spot, particularly over a period of time. Okay, so number one, and this comes back to the point that Stu was making about situational leadership. Okay, so number one, area number one, and you'll be pleased to know that that's it. There's only 5 points. So area number one, the leader demonstrates adaptable leadership behaviors and decision-making. Keyword, adaptable. So this means they can monitor the group, the environmental conditions, and the activity. So 3 key influences, and they can adapt their behaviors and decisions to meet ongoing safety, group, and task requirements. So i.e., depending on their group, the environment, and the task, they can adapt the way that they lead. Okay. And secondly, they're consistent and confident in their decision-making to achieve positive outcomes and communicates these clearly to the group. So just showing that they are at a standard that means that they are competent and confident in delivering as a leader. They can make good decisions. They can recognize those influences. It's not hit or miss. And this might be where we kind of have those difficulties with the borderline candidates. Maybe they're not being consistent, or maybe they're just not very confident in their decision making, or maybe they just can't communicate it to the group because they are indecisive. So maybe something like this, like point 1B, will help you with borderline students, because you can say, actually, you're no longer borderline, you'll most definitely pass or most definitely defer on this because you are not consistent, or you are repeatedly consistent. Okay. Second thing we have, so I will, depends on how well you remember all of this stuff, but when we talk about the INSPIRE model, which I'll show you shortly, it basically comes down to 3 categories. So overarching categories: vision, support, and challenge. So how you demonstrate behaviors that inspire your group, support your group, and yet sufficiently challenge them. So 1.2, vision. The leader is a positive role model and aims to inspire others. Fairly straightforward, I hope. So that means they can articulate, doesn't necessarily matter how that happens, but they can articulate clear and agreed values for their group, i.e. it's not self-motivating necessarily. They lead by example, and they behave how they want the group to behave. And this is where you sniff out the authentics from the inauthentics, because they lead by example and they have agreed values. So within that short sentence, you actually have a number of tick list factors that you can say, actually, they haven't agreed with this with the group. They're just very dictatorial. They just tell them what they're going to do all the time. That, yeah, I'm happy with that. That's a no for this one. Okay, then coming on to support. The leader creates a positive and supportive environment for the group. So recognizing, respect, and responding to the individual needs, the differences, the strengths, and the abilities. And I think actually all your comments about giving in the moment or sort of, hot and cold reviews and feedback about how the candidate is doing, perhaps this is where you're utilizing that. This is where you can talk to them about that. So you need to adapt your leadership candidate X, because you need to understand that not everybody is up to that standard, or the leg was too long for perhaps this particular group, etc., etc. And second to that, they encourage independent learning, so not just telling people what to do. getting people to think and discuss, and they establish an environment where mistakes are seen as learning opportunities, and they are able to provide clear and positive feedback to support this. So obviously that's what you're doing as providers. We know this from feedback. You're all very good at this. It's about differentiating and also being able to show them positively how they can move forward. So on a training course, these are your areas to work on. Here is something concrete. Don't just go away and practice. Go away and practice specifically about this. And Paul was talking earlier about having greater knowledge in an area. So this would be a very specific learning point for someone to take away. Go and get more knowledge about X, Y, or Z, yeah, before assessment, or indeed on an assessment between different phases. And then on the final sort of transformational leadership bit, the challenge. The leader provides relevant and appropriately challenging experiences. So this does link back to the idea that we are differentiating for the group, but it's about agreeing group goals and then being able to calibrate the level of challenge to individual abilities and motivations. Yeah. So you want to know that your candidates are able to differentiate and set appropriate challenge with appropriate support. And then second to this, they encourage and support the group and individuals to be part of the decision-making process, encouraging them to solve their own problems. So linking back to the support, this is about getting them to take some ownership, to take some responsibility. When we're training mountain leaders or climbing leaders, we're not just asking them to lead, we're asking them to inspire, develop, nurture, encourage the groups. They're educators as well as leaders. So this is really drawing that out. And then the final point for the competencies. So the first point is about situational leadership, about how you adapt your style. The middle 3 points are about transformational leadership. So 3 different ways of demonstrating behaviors to get the most from your group. And then the final point here, 1.5, they understand the mountain training ethos of leadership. So that's inspiring, developing, enabling. And they have a developed leadership philosophy. Now, all we mean by this, a leadership philosophy is simply a set of values and beliefs. So it's about understanding the way you think about leadership. Yeah, so you might have a preference for a particular style. So, you know, I'm very coach oriented, despite the fact that I talk a lot. I'm very coach oriented. I'd rather draw things from people. But I understand that that's not the only way of leading, and my values that are intrinsic to that about experiential learning, about trusting and giving people responsibility. So that's kind of what a philosophy might look like. So we want to know that they're able to tell us what they think about leadership. So what is your view of leadership? Here you are, you've not just got technical skills. How are you going to lead when you have your own groups? And do they align with the mountain training ethos? Because it would be very unusual to find somebody who's particularly, you know, fundamentalist about something, but we want to kind of know they're on the same page as mountain training. Hopefully that's never really a problem. And then secondly, that they acknowledge and can describe a range of leadership philosophies. And that's not necessarily like a testing question, like you have to be able to tell me who did this leadership philosophy and what do you think about that, but just so that they can open up a conversation about leadership and understand that every different style and behavior has an impact on the group. In the same way that in our group chat, we've been having a discussion about, well, do you give continuous feedback? Do you give praise? It's just sharing philosophies and understanding the pros and cons of each. Okay, so that's what I have there. I'm going to leave it up. I'm just going to reduce it a little bit so you can see the whole page. Sorry, it's a bit small. And basically, I want us to chat about this. I want to know what your thoughts are, how this might help, where it might confuse, how it helps you. Let me know. So we'll start with Terry. Terry's left me a note. You can see my private things on there. I'm just going to move that down a bit. On the 1.4 challenge sections, that's this bit here. Generally, the assessor would give the goal or the objective whilst allowing the candidate to determine the means to achieve this. Yep, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you are sort of, as the assessor, you are giving your candidates quite strict briefs really throughout the week, because, you know, that's the whole point, isn't it? You'll go from here to here. I want you to give me this leg. I want you to do this. But I guess it's trying to find from them how they would integrate challenge in things. So perhaps that's where scenarios might come into play, or perhaps that's where open discussions about, so guys, girls, the weather today was particularly impinging. How might that affect how you challenge, say, a novice group or a group who are looking to get a refresher before they, you know, go on an alpine trip or something? Okay, so yeah, very good point, Terry, but it's also thinking about how you would draw that knowledge out of your candidates as well. So I'm just going to zoom that up there. Okay, yeah, you probably need a real group to assess this. Yeah, potentially. I mean, you mentioned that earlier, Chris, and I know that's something they use. Do they still do that with the MIA, where you have real, what do they call them? Guinea pigs. I mean, it's a great name, isn't it? Yeah.
Mock students.
Mock students, thank you. I was a mock student once. I'm pretty sure they called me a guinea pig, but thank you. I like the terminology. Yeah, I mean, it would be, assessment would be so much easier if you had a real group. So this is where we want to stress that, a bit like if you can imagine a colouring in book, because I'm very good at giving you examples. A colouring in book, it's completely blank. There are very defined edges. There is an aim, but you can colour it however you like. And the same applies here. We have these competencies, and again, this is draft feedback, really welcome. Do email afterwards because it is a lot to think about. But how you test those things, how you draw that out of your candidates is entirely up to you. So Guy and I were discussing this earlier, and some of Guy's suggestions were that it might be through just a discussion. It might be through a scenario. It might be perhaps a sort of one-on-one thing. It might be a written test or statement. It could be any way you want to draw this out. It could be that just having a group on a very challenging weather week might draw a lot of this out, because you will see them having to adapt their style because of the changing or the inclement weather. But if you have that sort of almost sort of nightmare situation you were talking about earlier, where you've got this very benign environment and you're not getting the challenge you need, how do you then draw that out? So we want to give you lots and lots of ownership over this, but we want to know that we're giving you the right framework and support as well. So I'm just going to have a quick look what else is going on here. Okay, so yeah, it is trickier without a real group. It is trickier, but you know me, Rod, I would just say, so how do we make it not trickier? Yeah, no, I'm not being facetious. I would just say that it is trickier, but how do we make it feasible then? And if we can help you, if we can support you, if we can adapt this, then we will. Yeah, let's have a look. So what else? Should there be signposting during training to allow candidates to develop sufficient knowledge? Yeah, so 1.5. Yeah, absolutely. So that's something we can definitely do. We can definitely develop some resources that allow people to understand. Because I mean, if I stood there and said to somebody, okay, what's your leadership philosophy? I imagine I'd be met with a very blank face and it would feel pretty left field. So I think if we can develop some resources that talk about different types of philosophies, different styles, leadership styles, developmental behaviors, anything that feeds into that, and certainly aligning that with, okay, so here's the mountain training ethos of leadership. This is what we ascribe to. And then here are a range of other things that would fit into that. I think you're right, Paul. I think that's very much about that gathering more knowledge. Taking Paul's point, this document benefit from inclusion on training. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So forgive my lack of knowledge about this, but I would envisage that this would be the kind of thing that's available. Do they normally have access to assessment criteria and that training? Yeah, Kath's nodding. Okay, great. Yeah, so definitely. So this is kind of your tick list, but it's what they'd be measured against as well, you know, give or take whatever changes we make to it. Chris, I love emphasizing role modeling. Yes. You know, you create a situation to compromise 1.4a. Yeah. Yes, yeah, lowland leader and hill and moorland leader. Yeah, I think it is more challenging, isn't it? So perhaps we then have to think about what the gold standard is and what aim, where we're aiming this at, because of course it has to fit right up to winter mountain leader, and there's going to be different sort of variations between that. We didn't want to make this so complicated that it was 20 different subsets for each level. But yeah, that's something we definitely have to consider then, Chris, about how we make it fit at every level, and whether there has to be perhaps different wording or different additions for different levels. Okay, any other thoughts about this?
I can chip in when
yes,
when
Guy, hi, please do. You chip in. Talk to me about timeline as well.
I'll get to that in a minute. I'm just reflecting on the feedback here, because this is why we wanted to do this, was to get your feedback, and this will be shared around the mountain training organisations, around all the technical officers, because what we're trying to do is to give you, as it were, a resource to be able to make training and assessment of leadership in many ways easier. And the first thing you've got to do in order to do that is to describe it. And we felt that the description of leadership within the syllabi up to present it's just a little bit woolly. And so it's harder to articulate what it is you want candidates to be able to do. And therefore it's harder to be able to give them feedback, specific, measurable and achievable feedback on assessment. So that's what we're trying to do. So about the specific points that have come up here, the whole real group thing, this has been around forever, but it becomes really acute when it's about leadership, because with leadership, really what we're talking about is assessing people's judgment, aren't we? Their judgment skills, because the day we leave them on a course, if we pass them, is the day they can start making all these decisions about other people on their own in that incredibly variable environment of the outdoors, or the indoors for that matter. And I totally agree that it is easier with a real group. And you do always have that option, but we know that practically that's very difficult. I did an awful lot of assessing in the climbing wall environment in my previous life. And I can tell you it takes half the amount of time, probably less than that, to assess a potential leader in front of a real group than it does with peers. So I totally understand that. Nevertheless, there are ways, I think, that you can assess people's judgment with peers, but you do have to create scenarios, you do have to change situations, you do have to have discussions, and you do have to have a sort of a model in your head against which you can measure the responses that you get from your candidates. I think this is the highest order skill of any assessor. I think assessing technical skills, obviously as long as you're comfortable within that technical field, it's comparatively easy because people can do it or they can't, and it's very, very obvious usually. It's very, very observable. It's much harder observing people's behaviors, but they have real impacts on the people that they are then going to lead. So I do think it's very important for us to do this. And I've seen when people have tried to defer people for leadership and they have appealed, and it's an extremely difficult situation because the sort of the criteria aren't there. So I think we have to try, and I think things like role modeling and scenarios are probably the way forward. But yeah, I really would welcome your feedback, because this has got to help you, not become a burden for you. And then, yeah, signposting resources about leadership, absolutely. There is a mountain training ethos, but there's not a mountain training, way. As somebody said earlier, people can be leaders in lots of different ways, and it's really important that people are authentic, which means they'll have their own style and their own way of delivering these behaviors, if you like, in their own way. And no one's asking anyone to act. That's not going to work. As an ex-teacher, I know that doesn't work. I watched lots of what I thought were brilliant teachers, tried to copy them and failed miserably. It's only when you find your own style of delivering behaviors that have the right effects upon your group, given the situation, that we think it works. So anyway, I've waffled on enough. This is not easy, but we're hoping that this could help you rather than make things more difficult. So yeah, any feedback is welcome. None of this is cast in stone. We're a long way from that. And one of the reasons we wanted to raise this was because the feedback from you as the providers who are going to have to deliver, or may deliver this, is the most important of all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well said, Guy. And I think when Guy and I were talking originally about timelines, obviously, I don't know if you've heard about this thing, COVID seems to have put a stopper to a lot of things recently. So it's likely that this wouldn't look anything more formal than it is for perhaps the next year. So maybe by late summer, we might have something kind of ready and agreed upon, and then it would start to be rolled out perhaps this time next year, maybe in time for the sort of the winter element to be tested first. So there's plenty of time for us to think about this, to reflect and kind of try it out and let us know what you think about it. But what I want to draw you to, and you've heard me say this hundreds of times, anyone who brushes past me in the street about this, is that these essentially, the vision, support and challenge bit are the transformational leadership bits, and people are already doing things. So you know on your courses, when you have a good candidate, when you're looking at the leadership or group management skills, they are the person who's able to talk to the group, to understand that everyone has different strengths and weaknesses, maybe be able to deal with a scenario. They're already ticking off a lot of these things without you having to overly stress the point of now I need to see them doing X, Y, and Z, or having a conversation that says, I didn't really see you recognizing, respecting, and responding to individual needs today. That's only really going to come into play if they are one of these borderline or perhaps inauthentic candidates. Most authentic leaders and would-be leaders who are up to the mark of being assessed will be demonstrating a lot of this already. It just allows you a little kind of comfort blanket of going, oh yes, good, tick, tick, tick. Okay.
I think it's important to say also that any assessment of leadership will always, like our schemes are, will always be holistic in nature. But this allows you to break it down a little bit more if you, well, you will need to give them feedback, positive or otherwise. And certainly if there's that sticky situation where somebody thinks that they're better than you think they are, which has already been raised, that could get really sticky in this area if you didn't have a resource to go to and say, no, look, you didn't do this, or you did that, and that's contrary to what we're looking for. And by the way, Richard Townsend, thanks for saying
yeah, thanks.
Got it down the side of A4. It'll come as no surprise to you that this has been boiled down over months like some stinking lobster.
Like a year and a half, I think, but yeah, thank you. Yeah, and Callum's raised the point there that another example of how you can colour this in however you like, asking candidates to talk one-to-one about a great day and a nightmare day and the leadership aspects of both. That's going to give you, and then getting them to feedback, that's going to give you, as you say, Callum, it's going to give you a brilliant insight into their philosophy about leadership. You know, if they're going to come across pretty quickly as whether they're vehement in one style or another, and gives you room then to sort of think, right, well, I'm not seeing a lot of 1.2 or the vision stuff, so I'm going to have to draw that out with this particular person.
I actually think one technique, not the only technique, but you can actually interview people about this sort of stuff, which is what a one-to-one talk is in a way. How you conduct that interview, of course, is up to you, but you know, thousands of people are appointed to leadership roles every day around the country, and the principal technique that's used is an interview.
Absolutely. And I think going back to Paul's point earlier about it's the level of knowledge that you have that you feel comfortable with as well. So it's kind of good for you to feel comfortable about how you want to deliver this. So if you are really kind of up on a lot of leadership stuff, you're feeling really confident with your kind of knowledge base, then great, you can delve into this as much as you like. But if you know that this is perhaps a weaker area for you, then you might want to leave it more for the group to demonstrate to you, like in the way of scenarios. Like interviews would be great if you're very confident about what you're trying to draw out. But if you know you need to build on this, maybe it's better sticking with some of the other sort of more shared elements like scenarios or, you know, scenarios or role playing, that kind of thing. So, but maybe then, like we go back to this dual level thing, maybe that's a really good place for you to sort of look at this list and go, well, is there anything on here that I could self-rate against? And remember, this isn't about you as a person or them as a person. This is about the behaviors. This is about how they demonstrate a particular skill set. It's not about who they are. It's about taking about accountability. Oh, Rich, I love that. I just saw that out the corner of my eye, and I really thought it's still possible to get some of this information from their dog. And I really did think you meant that, because I was like, well, surely the dog's going to behave quite well if they're a really good leader. I mean, I'm not really a dog person, but sadly it's D-log. But anyway, yes, you're right. That's another way of getting evidence, isn't it? You know, so we want you to feel that this is a helpful structure to give you a measurement tool, or even sort of like a checklisting tool, but that you have lots of different ways that you can color in around the edges, looking at the D-log, one-to-one interviews, informal chats, scenario-based, pop quiz, however you want to do it. So Stuart said here, hopefully this will be framed around developing people through the assessment so they are more aware of where they're at and how to improve. I guess receptiveness is the key. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and hopefully they've already looked at this. It's part of the rest of the criteria bundle, and that it's been kind of referred to at training as well, because this would hopefully form part of the feedback and action planning from training, because they might have all of the technical skills, or maybe, you know, great at this but not so great at that, but this is simply just another thing that they're being assessed on. So hopefully this is part of the culture of arriving at assessment, knowing that it's a rounding of assessment criteria. Okay, and yeah, receptiveness is key, and I think they're going to be more receptive the more that this is spread throughout the whole of mountain training. So having the Inspire model, having the magazine articles, having this fed to them at training, it's in the criteria, there are leadership resources, it's spoken about anytime anyone brushes past me in the street, it's spoken about at conferences, at AGMs. I think the more that it becomes part of the culture, the more receptive they kind of going to have to be about it, because it's as a given as a technical skill. So Catherine, well-written document. Thanks so much. I'm going to take all the credit for that. Discussion leadership styles, leadership continuum. Oh yes, okay, we'll talk about that. I'm just going to go through the transformational leadership stuff first, and then we will talk about that. So yeah, talking about leadership styles during training and also assessment is important as a reminder that there are many modes of leadership that are relevant to different situations, and they can be flexible throughout the same day. Everyone has a dominant mode, but hopefully can handle a range of styles. Yeah, hopefully not always the teller mode. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Catherine. That's Kath, sorry. That's a really good summary, really. And that comes back to, again, the point that was made earlier, I think by, was it Andy or Stu, about situational leadership, that we have to adapt, that in the same way we've got to choose the right knot for the right situation. So there's not really a right and wrong, but there's a more appropriate. It's the same with the leadership. They have to understand that it's about, like in the point number 1 on this sheet, adaptable leadership and behaviors. Just because you really like using a clove hitch doesn't mean you always use the clove hitch, because it may not always be appropriate. And you might feel a little bit uncomfortable about not using it, but you know that it's the right thing in the right place. And the same thing, that just because you don't really like being directive, actually, if there's a safety situation, you might just have to be uncomfortable and be directive. So same kind of thing. Thank you for that. So I'm gonna move away from this just for a sec. We can bring it up at the end. But I just want to show you, kind of just to remind you where that's all come from. So I'm just making sure I can hear things properly here. So yeah. So what is observable? So giving a list of things that you are looking for, that allows me, that allows you then, tell you what, I'm just going to move my, I've just realized that you probably can't see with this in the way. So let's move that down here. Yeah, so we've had a little look when we were talking earlier about scenarios where perhaps you need some guidance, you need that tick list, you need those competencies, and we've gone through some questions and the timeline there. So probably about a year from now, this is when we would hope that this is being rolled out, that people are doing this. But by all means, test it out beforehand, you know, and I know that this is what some of you are doing already. I know I've seen and observed and had lots of discussions with people about how they've integrated different models of leadership and that. So it's great. I think the conversation is definitely more open now. So it all comes back to this, that point about vision, support and challenge. Those 3 parts of the leadership competencies come back to the Inspire model. So this is the transformational leadership model. This is what I've been banging on about for the past 5 years. This is what's known as leaders in the military. They got there first with the really good acronym, but I like to think that Inspire is a bit more mountain training anyway. So this is the overarching intention of transformational leadership. The competency document is the specifics of what they look like on the ground. So, because if I said to you, I want you to inspire and motivate your followers with a unified vision, I mean, it sounds wonderful. I mean, we're talking like, you know, some corporate company pay me $5 a day to say things like that to them, but it's not, you can't measure that. It's very just waffly and very intangible. But if we talk about your candidates are able to articulate an agreed vision and an agreed set of goals and tasks with the group, that's much more tangible. That gives you the competency as opposed to the intention. So these are the intentions here. Okay, so this is where it's coming from. And this model is being tested in a range of cultures and a range of situations. So education, public health, the military, parenting, sport, as far from Canada, UK, Israel, America. It's been tested in many different ways, and it's still demonstrated to be the best way of getting more from your followers. So when you don't have to worry about safety right at the front of your mind, this is what's going on in the background. Okay, so it boils down to these 3 rough areas, because 7 things is a lot more tricky to remember than 3 things. We like simple. So if you have sufficient vision, so that's inspiration, motivation, encouragement, agreeing goals and ideals and aims and objectives, alongside a balance of challenge and stimulation and recognizing differentiation, along with sufficient support. So again, that differentiation of support from you as the leader or from them as a leader. If you have a balance between those 3 things, fantastic. And the good thing about this, because they are all about behaviors, so not somebody's style, this is about the way you act and the things that you say, you can observe them, which means that they can not only be measured and assessed, but they can also be trained. So if we look at, oh, I don't really know how to get the gallery off here. Let's see if I can make this somewhat different. Let's do it this way so you can see it all. So if we look at those 7 behaviors set into the 3 different categories, given potentially this is one of the resources, it is available on the website as a resource, but potentially this is one of the things that your candidates might be able to go and look up and say, well, actually, they told me that my leadership needed work in terms of, you know, points 1A and 1.2 and 1.3. So I can look at this and I can say, well, actually, I'm not very good at this, and I am good at that, and I'm not very good at that. Oh, actually, I'm good at all things in vision, but not very good at support and challenge. So it allows them to give, it's just a little bit more framework on it as well. So I'm sure a lot of you will have seen this before. I'm just kind of rushing through this a bit because I've definitely covered this a lot, and we can ask questions about this. It's more important that we get the context for the competencies. So for me, I take all of that information, like 40 years worth of transformational leadership research, and I put it into an A4 page like this because I also really like stickers. But essentially that's what I call them. So when I'm trying to describe it to people, so you've got your coloring in picture, this is how I color in my picture. I have a little piece of paper like this. It's an A4 piece of paper on waterproof paper. It goes everywhere with me, like literally everywhere. And when people are saying, well, how are we doing? What are we looking at? And I'm like, today we're looking at what I call encouraging problem solving, which is thinking creatively, which is part of the challenge subset of the Inspire model. I just like those words. They work for me. So this is how I color in. And when I work with youth groups, I literally give them stickers that are associated with those colors, because there's seven colors in the rainbow. I like to color in a neat way. So, you know, that's just one way of coloring in how this might be achieved. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that. The important thing is that we don't forget about this. So the criteria is there to measure over the 5 days or the 3 days or the 2 days of an assessment. So hopefully there would be some time for you to measure and observe those behaviors in your candidates, because we would pretty much hope that there wasn't such an ongoing safety concern that overtook the entire assessment, that there was no room for anything else. But essentially, this is just to reassure you, is there an immediate or pending safety concern? Yes or no? If there is, obviously their prime concern is that they need to fix it. If there isn't, and it's all safety is under control, then they can think about the behaviours. They can think about, well, what are the other criteria? You can think about how you would facilitate that discussion or scenario with them. And it's just a loop. It's Samantha's very technical flow diagram. Okay. All right. Are we okay? We are okay so far. Let's see if we've got anything else in the group chat. No, we're still good. We're still good. All right. Everyone's still with me. We're still alive. It's 8 o'clock. We've only got half an hour to go. We're all good. All right. I'm thinking we might need to have another little discussion in your breakout groups. So these might seem like quite difficult questions, but they're not. I want to look at next situational leadership. So how we adapt styles. So one of the key things that was in the document was this point here. The whole of point 1A and 1B is about the leader demonstrating adaptable leadership behaviors and decision making. Okay, so we've had a look at the vision, support and challenge bit. The leader philosophy thing is about understanding mountain training's ethos and us providing some more resources. So we've kind of dealt with all of this bit down here. I'd like us to look at this bit now. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go into little breakout groups in a second. And I want you to consider one or all, given that it's 8 o'clock on a Tuesday evening, I want you to consider just some of these things. So what are the key influences on how you, as an assessor, make decisions? How do you communicate with your group and individuals about the influences on leadership? So away from assessing now, so just in a discussion, perhaps on the training courses, how do you get the group to understand what influences decision-making and leadership? And how might a leadership style be adapted depending on the influences? So the nub of this is basically we have to adapt depending on different situations. So what do those different situations look like? When would we have to adapt and how would we do that? Okay, now I know I think like sometimes what's in here doesn't quite come out properly. So Guy and Kath, have I made myself more clear this time? Yeah, great. We'll just go for it anyway. We'll see what happens. So we'll just go and have a chat for 5 minutes in your group. I just want you to think about what influences leadership and decision making. How do we adapt our style? When do we adapt our style? And then we'll move on to actual situational leadership. So just 5 minutes in each group and we'll give you a minute warning. Okay, Kath, she's already on it. Right, just give me a nod when they're all back. Kath, if you wouldn't mind, please.
They'll all be back now.
Hey, hello everybody. All right, so we've only got 20 minutes left. I know the time flies when you're having such a joyous jazz hand filled time. So just a quick word from, well, anyone really from any of the groups. I'm not going to be so specific about it, but does anybody want to let me know what they've been talking about?
Go on then, I'll weigh in, Sam.
Yeah.
So yeah, we spoke a bit about doing it kind of in the classroom-based environment or kind of in context. One of the things came up was key influences on decision making, that kind of safety, enjoyment, learning pyramid. Obviously, safety is kind of priority, and then once you've got a safe kind of environment, you can then start to worry about the enjoyment, and then from there, the learning side of things.
Excellent. Cool. Nice. Yeah, very, very neat little description there, isn't it? Safety is paramount for everything. It goes back to that wee diagram there. But yeah, safety is paramount. And then after that, you can start to consider what might impact enjoyment and learning. Yeah, nice. Beautifully put, Stu. Thank you. Anyone else?
If you're happy for me to jump out of order, I'll talk about number 3.
Yeah, do it.
Because it follows on what Stu said, really. The leadership style follows the stress, I guess, and the situation we're in. So if something's safety critical, it tends to go quite autocratic. This is what we're going to do, and we're doing it now, bang. Whereas everything's a lot more relaxed, sun's out, plenty of time. Are we going to go left or right decisions, or even go proper laissez-faire and go, that's where we're going. Let's all just mosey that way and let people make their own choices. So I think, again, following on what Stu said, the safety often puts you into that much more autocratic mode. But when that's dealt with, or as you said, once it's fixed, everything comes a lot more relaxed, and you can pick and choose leadership styles appropriately then.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Gwilym. And a beautiful synopsis of what's very complicated. Yeah, I think this is the important thing to think about when we're talking about, and obviously I'm going to kind of big up the sort of leadership side of things. So there is 140 years worth of leadership research. Yeah, 140 years, thousands of models and theories, thousands and thousands of books, most of them in my library. But if you can get it down to like, okay, it's a simple pyramid, okay, it's a simple continuum, okay, you've got a rough choice of 3 different styles here, then that tells me, and it tells your group, that not only do you have the knowledge, but you have sufficient understanding of the knowledge to be able to communicate it in a simple way. That's all we're after. I really can't be doing with jargon and complicated theories and things. I mean, if we go back to this, that's 5 years of research of my life, 7 days a week in a nutshell, because there's no point being able to baffle people with big words and stuff. Just be able to say quite simply, you've got this choice, or this choice. Let's have a discussion about it. So I really like the way both you and Stu, Gwilym, have been able to put that across. Okay, lovely. So what I'm going to show you now is just the sort of mountain training view of the key influences on leadership. So of course, safety is paramount. So when we don't have to worry about safety, what are the other things that we're considering? And Stu said there about enjoyment and learning. So what are the things that we need to know? What's the kind of the top information we need in order to be able to make those decisions, and then obviously train our candidates to be able to think about those. So essentially it comes down to 3 things. So the group members, the environmental task, and the actual leader. So their style, their experience, their ability to be able to lead. So that comes back to our competencies, doesn't it, about how consistent and confident they are. Okay, so the things that are going to make our leadership style or our leadership decisions change are maybe the task we've set today doesn't meet the needs of the group. Maybe they're not as physically able. Maybe they have some special needs in the group. Maybe the environment isn't up for us today because the weather is inclement, or there's we're not going to get summit fever. And the reassuring news about all this is that it doesn't. Oh, I need to play that slide. Let's go first. Okay, in order to decide, first we have to stand what's going on. And I think it's the RAF came up with this amazing thing where you basically observe and orientate yourself to the situation. So look at what's going on, see what the group is telling you. So actually they're a bit tired, they're flagging now. Should we be continuing with this? And then orientate the situation to adapt to that. So the whole time as a competent leader, in order to be consistent and competent, we are deliberately engaging with what we're being presented with. So we're engaging with the weather, we're engaging with the time, we're engaging with the hours of daylight, we're engaging with the needs of the group, the ability of the group, individual members, our comfortable level, our comfort level with what's going on, our experience of this situation. Actually, I know the wind picks up down here in a funnel effect at 3 in the afternoon, so we probably should be moving on now, that kind of thing. So deliberately engaging and observing continually, and that keeps us on top of our safety thing as well. So this is really all we're talking about. These are the influences, and the way that we control them is by engaging and observing. And the good news is you're already doing this. This is what being a leader is about in the outdoors. You have to be doing all these things. You wouldn't deliberately not meet the needs of your group. You wouldn't deliberately ignore the environmental warnings that you're getting. I mean, we've all had epics, right? I mean, I have, I'm hoping I'm not the only one, but we've all had epics, which means that perhaps we've learned from experience what happens if we don't engage and we don't observe and we don't engage with those observations. Okay, that's what experience is about. And what we're trying to do, what you're trying to do on an assessment is allow your candidates the opportunity to tell you, to show you, to explain to you, to demonstrate to you that they understand about the influences and that they can adapt to them. So a way that they can adapt to them is by looking at things like situational leadership. Now, is anybody here old enough to remember the Channel 4 test card? Remember that like thing that used to give you a migraine with loads of colours on it? That's what I think when I look at this, right? So this is essentially what was being mentioned before about situational leadership. It's what Gwilym just kind of summed up. It's what Kath was talking about. It's Sue was talking about, sorry. It's essentially you change your style depending on the situation. Now, I hate this diagram because I think it's overly complicated. It's one of those things that you sell to corporate for a lot of money. This is what I prefer instead. Okay, so this is something we came up with for the military groups because, quite frankly, this gives me a migraine. Okay, so what we're saying is that depending on the situation, you can adapt your leadership style to still get the best out of the group. So we have a 2 continuum. We have low support, high support on the left. So the amount of support that the leader is giving. And then on the bottom, we have low and high amount of control. So when the leader is giving low support and high amounts of control, they are basically telling the group what to do. They're not supporting them, they are just telling them what to do. If, however, they have a high level of control but a high level of support, that's what coaching is. You're still controlling the situation, you're still getting them to respond to you, but you're giving them enough support that they can perhaps experiment a little bit. And then obviously on the other side, high support, low control, low support, low control. Okay, so Gwilym was talking about laissez-faire, which means leave to their own devices, and that's basically the bottom left-hand corner. I've got low control, low support. The important thing about this is it can also be expressed, and this is where you get the Samantha's many talents. So this can also be expressed as a continuum. So this here is our level of control. So as a leader, we start off with loads of control. And maybe over time and experience. So imagine this is a group, a novice that you have, or the group that you're training, or as your candidate has a group at the beginning. As they become more experienced, you relinquish some of that control and you increase the level of support. So this is support on the bottom here. It would have been better if I'd drawn it the other way around. The important point to notice is that as a leader in the outdoors, you never fully relinquish all of control, because obviously that is the safety bit. Okay, and that's why on this diagram, the arrows, the cross in the middle doesn't fully touch the bottom, because we never fully relinquish control. Okay, so that kind of makes sense to people. I just wanted to kind of introduce that because it's been mentioned a few times. So essentially it's about getting them to recognize that the competencies are 5 different subjects. 1, situational leadership, which is what we've just looked at there, influences and styles of leadership to adapt to the situation. 3 components of transformational leadership, that's that vision, support and challenge. And then 1 component, understanding that leadership is a range of styles, values, beliefs, and basically pick what suits you, but understand that there are other ways of doing it. And hopefully in the mountain training family, we would pick a philosophy, a set of values and beliefs that aligns with the mountain training ethos. Okay. So let me just check the little group chat down here. Oh no, all gone quiet. This is the really good thing about doing a late night kind of slot, because people sort of switch off about 6:30, so I can pretty much say anything now and no one's going to contest it.
There was a hand went up, Sam.
Oh,
Samantha, but I've lost it now.
Okay, who? Oh, was it Callum? I think
That was the
Callum.
test card.
Oh, was it? Yes. Okay, excellent. Let's get the happy little test card back then, because that is a doozy. Okay, so actually, let me just clear the screen a little bit. My technical wizardry. Yeah. So if you imagine this little Isle of Dogs being stretched out, it would have delegating at one end, telling at the other end, and that's the kind of directive bit. And what you're looking at is that sort of at one end we've got a really sort of low amount of control and support. We're just letting the group get on with it, and that's a great place to be when you're dealing with people who are competent, but it's not the place to be when there's a safety scenario. And then as we move along the continuum, we increase the level of either support and or control. Okay, so this box at the bottom here I wouldn't lose any sleep over that. I mean, I am more than happy to explain this to people because it is, you know, it does look quite fancy, but really, this is all we're talking about. This is all you really need to kind of concern yourselves with. And there may be, depending on, you know, which sort of consultant company you work for, there may be other descriptors used here. There may be descriptors used in between. But essentially what we're looking at is that if a leader needs to take control of the situation, they're definitely going to take more control of the group. If they can allow the group to blossom a little bit, well, maybe they're going to be a bit more coachy in their style. They're going to take a step back. Maybe if the group is that much more progressed, they're only going to need to support them. So like, hey, you've got this. You don't need any coaching pointers from me. I'm just gonna be here and I'm gonna, you know, kind of give you feedback. And if you're delegating, well, essentially you're saying, I'm not doing that job. I'm leaving it to you. And I expect you to understand the brief and come back and feedback to me at the end. Okay. Any other thoughts on the exciting world of situational leadership? Or influences, or indeed the competencies, or anything? Cool. Okie dokie then. Right, so Guy, if anybody has any questions or indeed feedback, are you happy for them to come through me, or do you want them to go somewhere else specifically? Because I can write up my email address on the board if you want that.
Either way, it will get to us, won't it? But one of the principal reasons for running this workshop was that we wanted to show you those draft competencies to get your sort of feelings and feedback about it. Because we see this as part of the development process. It's really important that you understand what we're trying to create for you, and that hopefully we're not, you know, that we do not want to create more work. Quite the opposite. We want you to be able to assess people holistically as you do, talk about leadership in the way that you do. I don't expect people to have to be standing there with a clipboard with all these different competencies and sort of ticking people along as they're going along. But it is a tool by which you can teach and explain what good leadership, the components of good leadership are about. And it is a tool where if you then want to give feedback about people's leadership performance, that you've got this to refer to, and obviously refer to it on the assessment itself. So yeah, we're really interested to hear your feedback, because this is only going to work if you think it's going to work. But we've wanted, to be honest, to update the leadership components of the syllabi for quite a while now. We feel what's in the syllabus, although well-meaning, well-intended, is a little bit woolly in its description, and therefore it's harder to both train and assess leadership, which is what we're all about, you know, or at least a good chunk of what we're all about. So yeah, I really welcome any feedback, and I'm really glad what you've told us so far. And we will consult. There's another one of these workshops, obviously, and MTS and MTBI, I'm sure, will be consulting with their providers too. I think George is having a conference with his providers pretty soon, because he's been involved in drafting these with Doug Cooper up at Glenmore Lodge. That's where all these drafts originated from. And yeah, so if we feel confident that you're confident, then a version of this will hopefully be agreed to go into the walking schemes. And then, of course, we would set about doing two things before we roll it out to candidates. Firstly, we get back to providers and provide any training that's needed based on sort of the discussions we've been having today, and also resources, because quite rightly these things would need supporting resources. But fundamentally, we've got to kind of agree as an organisation, from providers upwards, that this is what we'd like to deliver to enhance the schemes that we've been running for years.
Excellent. Thank you, lovely people. So there's my email address up there. Some of you probably already got it. You can pretty much find it anywhere. I'm, not shy. And please do send me questions. Please do send me scenarios. Let me have any feedback about the competencies. I'm more than happy to respond to you. I'm usually pretty quite quick on the email. Usually I say that and people are like, oh yeah, that's great. And then like one person will send me an email and I feel really sad about that. So please do get in contact. You've got any comments, queries, anything you asked me about, I usually inspires me to do some other resource stuff as well. So it might help somebody else. The last thing I'm going to leave up there is this is your next session tomorrow morning. You've got time for like a good 12-hour sleep for your brains to reboot. But yeah, okay, so thank you all for joining in. Thank you for all your discussions and nice things that you've said, and good testing questions as well. Thanks for joining in. Yeah, please send me your emails. Write to me, I'm lonely. All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining in.
Thanks very much. Bye. Bye all.